Next up, so excited to introduce the author of The AI Dilemma, coming out in just 2 weeks. Please pre-order it. It's super important to any author, but also you're going to love having this as your end of summer read. Friend of A.Team, Juliette Powell. Juliette, take the stage.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, everyone. I've got to ask, when's the last time you went to a salon, right? I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much to A.Team and to all the sponsors for having us and for everybody who actually showed up. It's a pleasure to see some friendly faces. Thank you to everyone that's online that's also joining us. And I have to say that I'm incredibly excited, not just to be here, but also because, yes, we have a book coming out. And of course, the timing is kind of exciting. When I started thinking about the AI dilemma, and for those of you who don't know what dilemma I'm talking about specifically, it's pretty straightforward. If you know anything about AI, in the right hands, it can benefit the world. It can benefit all of us. In the wrong hands, it can harm a lot of people and potentially the planet. So that's my big dilemma on why I decided to dive in and learn more. But more importantly, I think that I was in an incredibly privileged position. I can honestly say that most of my friends are engineers, and invariably they call out to me and they text me and they tell me about what they're working on and all of the hopes and dreams that they have in developing these incredible tools. But they also tell me about how freaked out they are. They are terrified in many cases because they don't know what their products will do in the medium and long term. And these are really smart people. Some of these people might even be here watching today. And so I started asking questions, and I ended up going back to school. I did a dissertation at Columbia that focused on the possibilities and limitations of self-regulation in artificial intelligence. A real fascinating topic, right? Everybody's like, why are you spending time on this? Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? They're not going to listen to you anyway. And I said, well, you know what? At the very least, let me finish my degree. And then I thought, if I'm going to finish my degree, let me turn my dissertation into a book. Great. But then I realized the world actually now has AI in their hands. It's not just my friends, the engineers. It's not just folks in big tech. We now have generative AI. And as I was putting this book to rest, boom, 100 million users in one shot, in 2 months. And the numbers keep growing. And so when I think about, again, this idea of self-regulation in artificial intelligence, what does it mean? Well, based on my research, not a whole lot. Honestly, we can talk about self-regulation in big tech, but we look at the realities of it. We've got 3 giant tech companies, AI cloud companies in the world that are vying to be number 1, and they're willing to do just about anything to go there. And why not? There are billions of dollars at stake, and so many of us here in this room are working on these technologies not just for experimentation, but because we want to grow our businesses, and ultimately because we want to scale those businesses, and because we want to make money. And in some cases, we actually want to do good while we're doing all of those things. So how do you balance those things? How do you self-regulate yourself when you're an entrepreneur? How do you self-regulate your own ambition when you could potentially hurt people? Well, that's a question that we all have to answer individually, right? But one thing is clear, that with great power comes great responsibility. And the kicker is that when we have these tools in our hands, no matter who we are, we feel like we're more in control. We feel like all we have to press a button and boom, right? Our order arrives, our car arrives, our date arrives. For the most part, people aren't necessarily asking questions. And I'm talking about the general population as much as some of us potentially in this room, right? We're so excited about the technology that in some cases we even forget to ask, well, should this be AI, or is this just kind of a straight up logic? What is it that we're trying to accomplish with our AI, whether it's generative AI or not? What are we trying to do? Well, yes, this is me. This is the book, but let's move on. Oh, let me go the other way. Here we go. So this is what we came up with as we were doing a competitive analysis of big tech in the United States. as well as in some other countries with which the United States is competing. Ultimately, the apex benchmark is the real benchmark of what an organization has to go through when they're scaling and when they're trying to compete at scale for this type of positioning, being the number one player in AI cloud. You can start out with the best intentions in the world, but if you want to compete, you've got that profit imperative. You want to compete, yeah, there's acceptable risk, and some people will get hurt. Some people more than others. In some cases, some of them look more like me than some of you. There's innovation. We all want to innovate, and there's a cost to that, but we're willing to do it because we want to be number one. And of course, the state interest, because if you become really, really good at what you do, invariably the government is going to come get you and you get to work with them, which means that potentially you're no longer vying for just millions of dollars of contracts. You are vying for billions of dollars in contracts. And whether you like it or not, at some point, if you're going to go from startup to a big player, you're going to have to scale, which means that you have to listen to the people that invested in you. They want a profit, and they want that profit now. They want you to innovate. They want you to take those chances. Just keep going. Fail forward. It doesn't matter. But potentially it does matter if you realize in some cases that some humans are getting hurt in the process. So I really appreciated how we began this conversation by talking about experimentation. Because the apex benchmark is essentially a race to the bottom. When we talk about self-regulation, when we talk about trying to become number one, slowly we tend to erode those things that we care about, those things that we think that we can just put aside because we're just going to get to that number one position, and then we'll be able to set the stakes and decide how all the other players are going to go. And that's really how it works, right? When in an ecosystem and you're at the center of that ecosystem, you're the big fish. What you do matters. Your competitors are looking at you for signals, and in many cases, they will follow those signals. So if you drop any kind of responsibility vis-a-vis the technology that you are developing, the technology that you are deploying, then you are lowering not only your standards, but also the standards of your competitors, the standards of the entire industry in many cases. And that's what we saw when we did the analysis, and we called it the apex benchmark because of apex predators. So it's this benchmark where if we hit a place and the leaders decide to go lower, we will keep on going lower and lower and lower and lower. Now, I'll give you another example of the apex benchmark that most of us have seen when it comes to generative AI. I had the opportunity, because of this book and because of such incredible relationships with people that are in big tech, we knew, right, that OpenAI was going to launch. Most people in big tech knew that this was going to drop. We just didn't know exactly when it was going to drop. And a lot of people that were working within the AI community, and specifically in responsible tech, kept pushing at big tech from within the organization, saying, we cannot release this right away. It is not ready for public consumption. They will not necessarily understand that this AI is not all-knowing, that it does not necessarily know you better than your spouse, better than your friends, better than your colleagues, better than your kids, right? However, because the ball dropped with OpenAI, all of a sudden, once again, that race started, and then next thing you know, you've got Google dropping it. They kind of stumbled when they dropped it, but they decided to pick it up and they ran with it with Bard. It's a different model. It's a more conscious model, but nonetheless, they launched before they meant to. Once the top competitor sets the pace, the others follow. And if you drop your standards, others will drop their standards too. I think we see this in many realms. This is not just about technology. This is not just about artificial intelligence. This is who we are as humans. We tend to follow the leader. So my question to you is, who is your leader? One of the granddaddies of artificial intelligence in healthcare is here, and we'll have the pleasure of hearing him speak a little bit later on. And there's another grandfather of artificial intelligence that I just recently met and have the pleasure of hanging out with in Montreal at the Mila Institute, Yashia Bengio. Who here has heard of him? You ever heard of him? Yeah. Yeah, he's pretty smart. He's avant-garde. And when Yashia says, you know what, folks, this stuff is moving a little bit too fast. Maybe we need to slow down our research. Perhaps when we're talking about more advanced technologies, we need to take a moratorium. And he actually got a bunch of people in the industry across the world to sign this document saying that they would slow down. Now, do you follow that lead, or do you decide to follow a different path? So we decided that we're going to do a little poll for you. And hopefully for the people in the room, you can just do it by showing your hands. People online, the poll, I believe, is going to appear on your screens, and you can vote that way. It's a very simple question. It's a yes or no. Yashia Bengio and a bunch of people that have probably worked in AI longer than you have, know a little bit more about it, have decided that it's worth taking a pause. Do you agree? Yes or no? Who says that we should take a pause on development of AI here in this room and online? Who says that? Really? Yes. Specifically, yes. Here, let me give you the mic. Go ahead.
So I'll say I read a piece earlier today, Atlantic piece about Sam Altman talking about the dangerous things that their future models. Sam Altman talked to the Atlantic in a piece out today about some of the incredibly dangerous things that he personally thinks that more of the advanced models past GPT-4 are able to do, but very much trust the employees within OpenAI to not deploy them. And that honestly scared the living hell out of me. I've been sort of shaking from that all day. So for that reason, I think the idea of taking a reset on this, and also how like toothless a lot of the promises of self-regulation the AI leaders have made to the White House recently makes me think that we're perhaps barreling faster than we're ready to go.
Okay. Now, this is a brave man who decided to put his hand up when nobody else, I believe, put their hand up. Let me ask the question again. Does anybody else in this room, including our folks online, believe that we should have a moratorium? And let me just say, as a little caveat, Montreal did it. It did it. Should anybody else have done it? I'm not seeing any other hands. Going once, going to, yes? It is more nuanced than that. Great. I want to hear why. But let me just see these hands. We've got, what, 5 now? Okay. About 5. How many do we have online, roughly? A quarter said yes to a pause. Half said no, and the other ones are undecided. All right, fair enough. Come on up here. Tell me, how is this nuanced? And I agree with you. And this is the important part. There are nuances. Tell us.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that there's nuances here because, like, ultimately, like you mentioned, OpenAI released already, right? So it's kind of too late to do a pause because, as you mentioned, one person pauses, somebody else goes, "Oh, there's an opportunity for me to spring ahead," right? What we need is thoughtful ways to really create alignment, but also to find ways to meaningfully regulate AI systems in the same way pharmaceutical regulates drugs they have no idea how they work, and they can still regulate them. If we're calling for transparency of language models, right now that's possible. Even the researchers, they don't know how they work. So to say, well, you can't use it unless we know how it works, that's not gonna, that doesn't track. The EU and the UK, they're ahead of it, but they're really not thinking long term enough either. They don't want to regulate or license narrow AI, only broad language model based AI. That's a mistake. Narrow AI like YouTube recommendation algorithms are super dangerous. Anything that has to do with a material impact on your well-being, super dangerous. Those are narrow. So, yeah, all right. Nuanced.
No, this is great. Okay, who else? Who else? Who agrees or disagrees with what this gentleman just said? I see a hand over there. Do we have a mic that can traverse the room or meet me in the middle? Right. So research, yes, but consumers, no. Is that? Great nuance. Okay, who else? Yes, please.
This is Roosevelt. I just have a question for him. How are you going to regulate something you don't know how it works?
Question, how are you going to regulate something that you don't know how it works? Same way pharmaceutical does. No. Okay.
I'm a physicist and scientist. I could tell you that's not true.
Okay. See, this is why I love salons. Come on up. Come on up. This is exactly, we're getting into it now.
I mean, we can't meaningfully deploy medications
Well,
if we're required to understand how they work. We don't. So we still regulate them.
We do have research going on.
There's research in AI as well.
That's basically know the side effects. Based on that, we make decision. It's not a black box. You just make a non-decision.
Right. Well, in the same way in AI, we may understand perceived completions, outcomes, but with AI, we ultimately need to understand more about them, and we're not even really sure if they're developing their own goals or anything like that. I mean, when we do reinforcement learning with human feedback, we're giving them goals, but we need to find a way to do that. Whether that is deploying AI to train and regulate AI, I'm not sure, but I think there's a way to do it. I really do.
So there's hope.
There is.
There's hope. We've got somebody over here, sir. Thank you. If you want to come a little bit closer, just so
come on up to the question couch, the debate couch.
Come on down. I feel like the lady in the Price is Right. Yes.
Greetings from Austin, Texas. We are here for you guys, actually. I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. But one thing that when we are talking about AI regulation, we all are missing is the word trust.
Aha!
Trust. And trust is a human value. It's not a machine value. Generative AI is designed to generate. It's like my 4-year-old, he's hallucinating, right? He thinks, says. That doesn't mean that it's the reality. It's not the reflection. So what do we miss? What we miss here is a solution that when we are looking at something, whether it's the video that you see online or an online review that you're reading, or you're calling your call center, them knowing, is it a real human or a machine? And even on that side, the current models will always fail. Why? Majority of it are based on perplexity. What does perplexity mean? Perplexity is a mathematical solution, right? It's the inverse of probability. There are lots of AI identifying solutions. I can name and name and name. There are so many of them. But here is one thing. If I go randomly select keywords and say 700 words, and I put 14 caps locks on random words, it's human. Did I change the trust or not? So again, we are missing one very, very human element here, and that's the behavior. And that's, by the way, I'm going to be a bit promotional here. That's why we built the... But now, joke to the side, behavior is a key element that you need to look into it. And we AI generators are thinking that just because we have generated, we are done there. We are not done there. The regulation is there. Like, if we don't have clinical trial, that's not a drug. It's just a kitchen product, right? If those are the very important things that we need to understand. How does it work is a key point. So thank you.
No, thank you. And thanks for coming up. Machine behavior. How is the machine behaving towards you versus towards me? I think that's one of the key questions that we have. I see more hands in the room, and we are almost out of time, and I apologize for that. But the whole point, and I'm so glad that it came to this, because this was really where I was going, is that ultimately it should not be one small group of individuals that are making these choices for all of us, right? The whole point of having a salon is so that we can have multiple perspectives coming together and influencing each other, so that we can create trust, so that we can create collaboration, so that we can create better technology to serve more people. And we call that creative friction. Creative friction is something that takes longer. Ultimately, when you have more perspectives in the room, it means that you have to deliberate longer. It means that you ask more questions. It means that you focus on more people and see how it might affect them versus you and your peers and so on. So, one thing that gives me hope about creative friction, because it's been studied at length, and I'll just drop one of the researchers at Columbia University, who's really, his work really blew me away, because he went to Wall Street and then he went to the Tokyo Stock Exchange and he found exactly the same thing. David Stark realized that the more diverse the teams on Wall Street, and I'm not just talking about race, I'm not just talking about sex, I mean neurodiversity, all of it. The more diverse the teams, the longer they deliberated, the more likely they were to come up with better solutions for more people, and ultimately to make more money and, yes, create trust. This happens across cultures, across industries. And I dearly believe that if we are going to do this generative AI thing right, because no, we're not pausing, we're going straight ahead. The question is, how do we move forward together in such a way that we all feel the responsibility and build on that trust? Thank you.
Juliette, you can stay up here. We got 5 minutes of Q&A.
Hot seat, lucky
we have
me.
the hot
Okay.
seat coming out. So this mic here. Does anyone have a question for Juliette? Come up here and you can speak into the mic for everyone at home.
This is coming from Quentin McGrath on the virtual feed. So we may not know how the Gen AI is doing it, but if we control what it is used for, the goals, and the output or outcomes through guardrails based on accepted ethics, perhaps we can get closer to regulation. I guess that's not really a question, but.
No, that's interesting, because, again, I'm always uncomfortable with the word ethics, to tell you the truth, because I wonder, ethics for whom? Ethics for whom? One of the things that we put in the book, The AI Dilemma, is 4 logics, the 4 logics of power around artificial intelligence. So you've got the government perspective, the corporate perspective, the engineering perspective, the people that are actually working on this, that are in this room. And then you've got the social justice aspect, right? And many times these different logics kind of come into play, and one is arm wrestling with the other, or with the other logics, but not necessarily working together. So if you look at the Artificial Intelligence Act that's coming out of the EU, I think they did a pretty good job of trying to, at the very least, represent all of these different logics simultaneously. And have you seen the fines on those things? Yikes. 5% of your annual revenue, right? Plus damages, plus all of your all of your other companies all over the world. Those are huge, huge, huge fines. So ultimately, I think one of the things to do with this creative friction is really try to figure out what are those opportunity costs, right? If we're going to innovate at breakneck speeds, how are we going to do it in such a way that we don't have any regrets? Because I think once we go past a certain limit, it's very much going to be out of our hands.
Any other questions? You want to come on down?
Hi.
I've been working in pharma for a long time, like 15 years, right? And so a lot of what we see is risk and reward.
Yep.
It's very measurable.
Yep.
But how would do you have thoughts on how you would measure the risk and reward for AI development?
Well, I think it's absolutely on a case-by-case basis. So one of the things that I learned from working with some of the people in big tech is this calculus of intentional risk, right? And that includes both, again, where's the company coming from? Where are they going to? What are they trying to do? What have they promised the world and their investors? Sure. But beyond that, like, what are the actual costs to an OpenAI to launch something versus a Google, right? Just reputationally, if you could actually put a dollar number to those two things, they wouldn't even be comparable. So I really think that this calculus has to be based on not only the organization itself, but the larger industry and the impact that it could potentially have on people, right? So again, the cost of a launch for a Google of a new product is hundreds of millions of dollars. How much did it cost OpenAI? Probably a lot less, right? So these facts, it's different. But we can talk about the calculus. I'm looking forward to being able to actually publish how we do that calculus on an individual basis so that more organizations can do it. And individuals too, because I think if you're really not thinking about what you're doing with your chatbot, what kind of data you're giving it, and how much you actually believe what it's generating because it's intelligent, I think everybody needs to do some sort of calculus of intentional risk and a lot more critical thinking.